keynote speech, which is going to last an hour, and this is a panel discussion with speakers from France. So we have Bertrand Barré, who is CEO of the Groupe Zebra, which is a design thinking company. Clark Kelogg, who is in charge of the innovation group at UC Berkeley in San Francisco, obviously American. And then we have Mathieu Aguesse, who is our moderator of this panel discussion. And Mathieu is a French guy living and working in San Francisco who heads up the Schoolab office in San Francisco. So it's a great pleasure to introduce these guys. This is a pre-recorded video. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat. Once we can manage live, we will answer through the chat because this is a long conference. And then if we can't answer your questions, we'll put you guys in touch with the speakers. So thanks very much. Enjoy the show.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this very interesting discussion that we're going to have together with Clark and Bertrand about is design thinking the new normal? We are the three of us, kind of experts, or at least we have spent a lot of time in our life around design thinking, and we would love to share with you what we think about the future of design thinking and reflect on our personal experience to do so. So it's a fantastic opportunity also to hear from two sides of the world about the future of design thinking. The French side, obviously, with Bertrand, and the US side and the West Coast side with Clark. To start, I'll introduce myself. My name is Mathieu Aguesse, and I'm the CEO of Schoolab here in San Francisco. We are an incubator that has been, using design thinking with students, startups, and big corporations for the past 15 years. And we are trying to bridge, two cities, two places, France and the US, in terms of innovation. And it's our great pleasure to be in this roundtable today. Clark, may I ask you to just, say a word about yourself before we start, kicking this off?
Well, thank you, Matthew, and hello, everyone. Bonsoir. My French is a third grade version, so I appreciate that you are all able to listen in English. I am an architect by training and practiced that for a while. These days, I am a professor of innovation, creativity, and design at the Haas School of Business at University of California at Berkeley, and a partner in an innovation firm called BIG, Berkeley Innovation Group. Most recently, and I think the most exciting thing for me at my age and stage in career, is I've been appointed as the first artist in residence at a business school in the United States. So that is me, and I look forward to chatting with my colleagues.
Bertrand, a word about yourself?
Yes, hello everyone, Bertrand Barré. So I'm the French guy and my English will be the third grade. But I try to do my best to be understandable. I ran an innovation firm and design firm that I set up 30 years ago in France. We started mostly with product design, then moved to packaging, then moved to UX design. Then 15 years after, we created a group of strategists in innovation management. So I would say that I born in this job with design thinking, and I'm trying to practice it since 30 years. So I would say I'm an old user, and I could say that I have seen some trouble. So we're gonna talk about that.
Great. Let me start with the first question for probably the youngest of the three of us, Clark. Clark, you've seen design thinking process. You've seen it probably born and blossoming for the past 30 years or so. How would you explain such a success, and how did it started for you? Like, what was the original appearing of design thinking for you?
Thank you, Matthew. Actually, I'll answer the last question first, which was how did it first come to me? And it was a bit of a story. I was in my design firm, and our first child had been born. I wasn't making any money. And one of my clients, my only big client, was American Express. my client there asked if I wanted to submit a proposal to a different division. I said yes. And if he would read it for me and give me comment before I submitted it. And when he read my proposal, he came back and he said, well, there's two things you'll need to change. This was 1981. So first, you'll need to change the name of your firm because Kelogg Design will not be taken seriously. No one believes designers do anything of value. And the second thing you'll need to change is your fee. You've quoted it at $14,500. If you want the job, you're going to need to add $100,000 to it. And so we submitted Kelogg Consulting a proposal for $114,500 and got the job. And what happened then was we instantly became a strategy firm.
Oh, yeah.
But here's the thing, and Bertrand and Mathieu, you'll relate to this. We did the exact same thing as a, quote, strategy firm. We just had 5 times the amount of fees. And so that was the lesson that showed me that design has power way beyond what we were trained to do with it. And that was my first peek at the power of design thinking.
So clear.
And so with that, may I ask a question of Bertrand?
Go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Because we have all, you and I particularly because we're older, have seen this growth of design thinking. What would you say from the French perspective, what industries or sectors of the society would benefit the most from today's design thinking?
Oh, big question. First of all, I would say that from the French perspective, we suffered during many years about this problem of language. Design in French language doesn't mean exactly the same thing that in English. So, of course, I fully understand the word to design. It's a verb. It's not an adjective. And in Europe, sometimes it's used as an adjective. You know, you have this design table or this beautiful car design. No. To design is a verb. It's an action. So I would say that design thinking is a process for to reinvent a product or a services. So design thinking has been discovered, I would say, in France with digital, not before. For me, the big assumption and the big development of design thinking is not longer than 5 years, and it's really coming with a digital. So everybody think that design thinking is really fitting companies on digital, on IT. But I really believe that it's a major activity and major weapon for big companies, which are too heavy for innovation, which are following the big old rules of R&D, which are looking for what we call, which are, I would say, stop and in difficulties with this famous sentence, none invented here. And this kind of company, which are really stuck on their knowledge, are the most profitable company for design thinking. If they implement design thinking, they double their capacity and their strengths within some months. So just an example, if you don't mind, I'm working with Michelin, the tire company. This company is really focused by technology, and they make their fortune and their legitimacy by technology. But introducing design thinking in such kind of companies, you give them the opportunity to discover the client, the consumer. They don't talk, since 30 years, they don't talk about consumers. Yes, they talk about consumer when they talk about marketing, go to market. But when they talk about innovation, they are just on technology. So this is technological company, more than digital company, are really the best to implement design thinking. But I will return the question to you, Clark. Imagine, and we go directly in our subject, is design thinking the new normal? Imagine 2050. What will have become of what today we call design thinking? I mean, in 20 years, what will be the design thinking that you have defined several years ago?
Well, that's a hard one, but I think there's two possibilities. One is that the profession called design thinking will have expanded and become quite well known, like we currently think of, say, product designer or accountant. There'll be a whole industry or a profession called design thinkers. That's one pathway. The other pathway is that design thinking as a mindset will be dispersed throughout companies and culture, and it will become a normal way of thinking, sort of like breathing air. and if that happens, where design thinking is just the way people think, then it won't be a separate profession. It will be part of life. And that is my hope, that we all begin to develop this universal mindset of curiosity, of discovery, of empathy, of learning by doing, of becoming deep, passionate listeners, and great storytellers about imagining the future that we want. Now, which of those two will happen, I don't know, but let's talk again in 20 years and see what we think.
But do you think, Clark, do you think that that kind of skill that you are talking about, like curiosity, like creativity, like passion, do you think that that kind of skills are taught in engineering school?
They aren't currently, to be sure, Bertrand. However, we do know this, that if we do more of what got us to this point in the world, and I'll talk more in terms of the sustainable Earth, not necessarily COVID-19, but if we keep doing what got us here, we won't survive 30 more years. So we do have to learn how to think differently. And I don't know what that will be like. I only know that by doing more of I'm a technically trained architect and know a lot about engineering as well. If we just keep doing what we've been doing, it won't be good enough. So we'll have to bring more curiosity, more openness, and more design into our companies and our lives if we're to reinvent our systems in a way that can sustain life on Earth.
It's funny. Let me give you an example of a collaboration we have here in France with a company called Babola, one of the major brands in tennis. And they asked us 15 years ago, they asked us to try to help them in a big project of diversification. They wanted to enter the business of the shoes. They were the leader in tennis racket, but they were not doing shoes. And they call us saying, okay, you organize the diversification. And it's funny, you're talking about creativity, you're talking about curiosity, empathy. And we start from there. And we didn't talk about design thinking. It was too far and too complex for them. We just say, okay, we start from scratch. So we're gonna watch the tennis player. We're just gonna try to make a first phase of observation. And we went with camera and pictures and big camera on the court and just watched the tennis player. And in 2 days, we just discovered that tennis player was running laterally, if I'm good in English. They were not running forward. And strangely, ironically, all the industry worldwide, all the shoe industry is working to go forward. And all the R&D, all the technologies are made to go forward quicker and quicker. And it's funny to see that tennis player, they go from side to side and they don't go forward. This design thinking process, what you call and I call empathize, give us an innovation territory for the 10 coming years. And this is the only reason why of the success of Babolat.
Wow. Wow.
So
You know, that makes me want, our talking about the history and the past makes me want to ask our young colleague, Mathieu, a question. Mathieu, you're at an interesting sort of hinge point, inflection point in the history of and evolution of design thinking. How do you think that design thinking will influence the next generations, and how the next generations will have an influence on design thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very, very important question that we're asking here. My personal belief is that design thinking is actually bringing kind of three elements that are really not that we kind of forget in our daily life, and even more the new generation. I think new generation, is a digital generation. They're called the digital native, and I think in that sense, there is a few things where they kind of forget what it was before. And the three elements I think are: one, taking the time. And I think we are seeing a generation raising which is just constantly consuming more contents. They're just going so fast. And I feel like one thing which is great with design thinking is that it just forces you to, at some point, pause a bit on what you've been doing for the past weeks, for the past months, for the past years, and just, stop, look at what's happening, look at your users, our customers, and just allow yourself a bit of time to kind of breathe and look about, what's around you. So I think that's one key thing, is to see how design thinking could help this new generation to take the time. Another thing where I think the new generation has kind of a need, or where they would really, benefit from design thinking, is also knowing. Don't accept that they don't know what they don't know. I'm going to pose it. But I think, we're in a generation where if you have any question, you would just, grab your phone and ask Google, which kind of give us, the sense that we know everything, and the information is so easy to access that we know everything. And I think another key thing in design thinking is to realize that that's not the case, that there is things that we don't know for sure, and there's even, a lot of things that we don't know. And I think that's really the key about design thinking is creating this form of humility, around information, around, what's around you, and try to create, bring this humility, help you step back, and help you have very different approach on your daily action, either at work, how you're designing a new project, how you're creating a new project, whatever, but also on your personal life. And I guess design thinking may bring, kind of an extra layer of intelligence to the new generation. And I think on the other hand, the new generation is also gonna, take this tool and stretch it to make it like their own tool. There is something pretty interesting that we've seen emerge for the past years, and we call it ethnology of the byte, in terms of the bit, in terms of we've been looking at users from interviews, and like the techniques that we've been using on design thinking for the past years are very standard methods, where we go interview people, talk with them, spend some time with them. And I think we haven't yet triggered the impressive power of data, for instance, and of all this kind of parallel world that is happening online. And I think that's what we're seeing more and more while we work with students, is that their primary source of data is also online, is also trying to figure out, like, what can I find kind of interesting material, interesting learnings from data. And I think they would make, they would probably push design thinking a step further by merging design thinking approach with also our new tools, modern tools, such as big data and AI. And I think it makes me extremely excited with the future about how you can really elevate design thinking with the tool of the next generation.
And if I could just do a yes and to what you've said, Mathieu. The lessons that all of us that are listening today about how we've lived through the COVID-19 pandemic is a really, to me, interesting acceleration of what you've just said. My little company does a design thinking online teaching class, and in the pandemic, we've had a lot of enrollment from all over the world, and my business partner is 40 years old. He could be my son. He's younger generation, and I said, online, this is going to be really hard. To your point, Matthew, all the tools we use are Post-it notes, interviews in person, and all. And he said, oh, look, let's just try it. And what has happened is that we have these very strong relationships forming from Europe, from Asia, from US, from Latin America, and we're able to work online and increase the power of the empathy, increase the power of the insight, and bring data in. And I am so glad that I was so wrong, because I think you're completely right, Matthew, that the new powers of digital world contribute greatly to our design thinking skills.
Absolutely. Question for you, Bertrand. Speaking about that also, about the future of design thinking, do you see any credible alternative to design thinking in the innovation process? Because what if, we were wrong and design thinking is not a new normal, but something else? Like what if disruption happen in the innovation business and new alternative come? What do you think about that?
I would say that, first of all, design thinking is still disruptive. Really, even if it's a 30 years old process, it's still disruptive, because not everybody is using it, and it's changed really the way you do innovation. I think we move from a world who is made with two words: learn, then do. And this is the way we are educated in Europe. I don't know everywhere, but you learn and then you do. And if you don't learn, you don't do. And the way of thinking of design thinking for me is you do and you learn. It's really a big change. Try, contest, try to challenge the existing, and don't trust. I would say, which could be a little bit shocking, don't trust blindly the experts. I've been educated in a world where experts knows everything, and as you said, now with digital, with Wikipedia, with all the know-how, we don't need it. We have it everywhere. The know-how. What we do is to learn, not is to learn, is to do, to practice, to try, but also to redefine, and this is the job of design thinking, redefine the playground of the expert. I'm not saying the experts are not anymore useful, but design thinking can rejuvenate and redefine the playground of innovation. And then we use the same expert. So I think the breakthrough will come mostly from perhaps business modeling. I mean, the notion of value is really moving. If you consider Google, for instance, Google, which is one of my best friends every day, so perhaps one of my best brands, I don't pay for it. I'm using Waze for my mobility. I don't pay for it. What I mean is that the best brand, the best business model will be built perhaps on another notion of value. And so perhaps this is the most disruptive new phenomena, the business model rupture. Perhaps tomorrow you won't pay for a restaurant just because in this restaurant somebody will deliver to you another message. I'm not talking only on advertising, which is possible, but perhaps a new recipe, information on the product that you eat, and perhaps with this you won't pay the bill. So the disruption is not on a methodology. I really think that design thinking will has a beautiful, fantastic future, but the definition of value will change. And I don't know, Clark, what you think about that. Does design thinking can provide a fantastic tool to redefine the value?
Well, I think, yes, I think you just touched on it with those examples and imagining a world in which the restaurant feeds you for free and gets their value some other way. I do feel, I agree with you, Bertrand, that the use of design thinking and what's the fuel of design thinking? It's curiosity. I think we would all agree that that's the piece of it, that the experts don't know everything, and they know a lot about one thing, typically. And so the curiosity piece, the learn by doing, all those things that you just mentioned are allowing us to invent new business models, to see new possibilities, and to not have, and this is an important cultural piece everywhere. You know, in France, where you rightly value the history and culture so highly because it is so wonderful, the downside of having that grasp on the way things are is that it makes it harder to change things to something new. And what we are able to do in the design thinking processes is to move beyond what we call the orthodoxies or the way things are. Or in the US, thinking about the pandemic, the way things used to be or should be. And what we're able to do with the mindset of design thinking is to not think that way, but to see new vistas, new worlds of possibilities. And the part of it that I find so freeing, liberating, is just because we think it up, it doesn't mean we have to go do it. It means that we're imagining different outcomes, different business models. It imagines that, I mean, it says that we can imagine building shoes that support lateral movement, not just forward movement. And there's no harm in doing that. And in fact, there's often a great deal of good, as your experience pointed out, Bertrand. So I think that the use of design thinking to imagine different scenarios, different businesses, different business models, different products, different governments is critical right now. And I used to think that if I could dream it up, if I didn't build it, I was failing. And I'm happy to say that that's not true, that there's no obligation to execute an idea, but there is an obligation to imagine all kinds of new things. And I think that's the key, at least for me. Once I realized I didn't have to make everything I imagined, it was so freeing, and I could imagine many, many more things. And I think that's the power, one of the powers of this methodology, is to freely imagine things differently than they are. And if they're good enough, then we will choose to execute them.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. But to build on that, Mathieu, you know, we talk a lot about, in this example of imagining new circumstances, we always talk about putting the customer first, imagining the customer, empathizing with them and understanding their needs. But how can we know what the user wants, even if they don't know what they want?
Yeah, absolutely. I would refer to I think it's a quote from Henry Ford, who said, if I would ask the user what they want, they would tell me faster horses. And you know, he obviously didn't follow what the user said, and he built the car basically. And I think that's one of the challenges where if you want to do it really properly, design thinking, you have, and it's also referring to the point of that Bertrand made earlier about maybe sometimes don't listen to experts. And I think same thing for users. You have to listen to users and not just to do what they're saying. And I think one key here, which brings a bit of techniques about the observation and ethnography, is to be able to listen really to what the customer are saying, what they're feeling, and to figure out all the different gaps that you can have between what they're saying and what they're actually doing. And I think that's really where design thinking became instrumental, is when you manage to figure out, the deep needs and the deep concern of a user. Let me take a very, very easy example. If you were to ask, a parent, like, let's say, a mother of 4 kids or a father of 4 kids, what are you cooking for your kids, at home at night? They would probably tell you, well, I'm only doing fresh vegetables and fresh food, and it's very healthy and so on. And then you go and spend a week with this person, and you would realize that 3 out of 4 it's frozen pizza and easy to do stuff. So it's not that the users are trying to lie. It's just that there is gaps between what they're thinking they're doing and what they're actually doing. And I think once you figure out a way to find those gaps, to identify those gaps, and to really go into the deep needs of users, then you can start realizing that maybe their needs are not served the proper way, and maybe it's like they can't express something that they can't imagine, but for sure they would use it. Same thing for the iPhone. If you look at the customer research that has been made before launching the iPhone, you would see that I have the exact figures, but like less than 20% of the user in Europe were saying, yeah, I would enjoy having a device that could be at the same time a camera, a phone, and a computer. And guess what? Like almost all of them purchase one afterwards. So I think that's one key of really becoming a black belt of design thinking, is when you manage to accept that users have to be surveyed, you have to listen to them, but you have to listen so deep that it's not about just doing what they've said. Is really about getting a real understanding about what their experience are, what they're living, and how you can serve them the better way. Which actually, yeah, bring me to. I know, Bertrand, you're also a big thinker about observation. What do you think about?
I love this conversation, because I'm used to say, don't ask, observe. Please don't ask. And it's a big breakthrough, because we have been educated again with 40 years of marketing, where with marketing you were supposed to ask questions and to know better and better your consumer. It's not you, but the big novelty is that you don't ask questions, you observe. And as you say, there are big gap between the reality and the observation. More than that, I would say that as we use these new tools of observation since a long time, we have introduced a second breakthrough, because the common sense is to say that this is what we heard everywhere. If you go to observe, you need to be naive, if it's English, naive. I mean, you don't need to be an expert, you need to be naive, like an ethnologist. And in fact, we say, no, this is the contrary. At Groupe Zebra, we try to give, and this is a big notion of branding among the design thinking, which is a lack in design thinking. We could go back to this later. But we introduced the notion of posture of the company, or posture of the brand. It means when I observe, if I go today, Mathieu, in your office, with a posture which is defined about organization. Mathieu is an organized guy. I'm sure that I will find 20 clues, 20 details that prove me that you are organized. And if I go 10 minutes after in the same office, in your office, with the posture of Mathieu is not organized, it's a mess, I will find 20 clues of this mess in your office. What I mean is that observation needs angles, posture. And what we do is the contrary of what has been taught to us. It means we don't use naive people. That's the contrary. We prepare this observation to be sure that we're going to see something different, something enthusiastic, something ambitious, not only blah, 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 what we call the customer journey, which is able to be done in 10 minutes. You follow what I say, or I'm clear?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It means, for instance, if you work for, look at the car, for instance, the car industry. It's funny because I'm involved in many projects at the moment in mobility. Mm-hmm. We use word, the power of word. We use word like in French, voiture individuelle, individual car. And it's funny to say, and this is the word that we use everywhere. And it's funny to see that there is no individual car, no one. The more little car has 2 seats, and the common car has 4 seats or 5 seats. It means in the world we make the mistake. It means the world is there. We need individual solution, and nobody is trying to develop it in the car industry. And it's funny to see that as soon as the trottinette, the moped, you say moped, the trottinette, no, the scooter arrive in the cities, it's an invasion. This small individual solution. You observe, you don't ask question, and when you use word, you try to listen on the word that you are on the pronunciation and the meaning of the words. That's why I could ask to Clark a question on this. According to you, Clark, what is the hardest part of becoming an expert designer? Do we need to be a designer? Do we need to be an engineer? What is the hardest part?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an interesting question, because we tend to define maybe 8 or 10 skills that make us good at this. But I think building on your comments, Bertrand, of observation, I would say it is to sustain your curiosity as the hardest skill. And we have a saying in my office, which is that curiosity is better than judgment. And you know just what I mean, because your stories of observation are so true with that it's hard to not judge things when we encounter them. Either we meet a person and we say, oui, c'est bon, or no, right? We yes or no. When we come in contact with music, it's yeah, I like it, or no, I don't like it, or art, or fashion, food, you name it. We have opinions about all of these things. And my father used to say to me, son, put your mind in gear before you open your mouth. And I never quite understood that when I was young, but as he grew older and I did, I understood him to mean that, think about what you're thinking before you come to judgment about it. And,
yes.
And I think that's the hardest thing for humans to do, is to not judge everything instantly, but to be curious about it. And here's a little thing that all of us that are listening can do. When I find myself, I happen to be living during COVID up in some mountains in California, and don't see very many people, but I walk around the woods a lot, and when I get tired, I fatigue, I switch my mindset and say, be curious. Don't focus on being tired. Be curious. And suddenly my energy jumps up. You could try this anytime at all. When you're full of judgment, just switch it to curiosity, and you'll find that the experience is quite different, because you are appreciating what is around you and you're interested in learning. Now, you can't fake curiosity, but you can certainly use it to see the world in a different way. And when we're able to do that, the world becomes so fascinating to us, and it's joyous to be curious in the world. And to do that, we need to be able to suspend our judgments about everything. There's a time for judgment, but not it's not every time. And doing design thinking to become expert at it, I think that's the most important skill, is to be able to switch on our curiosity and switch off our judgments. Does that make sense, Bertrand?
Yes, but does it mean, Clark, that you say, if I am an expert or whatever the technology, are you claiming that I need to I would say turn off my knowledge for a minute and try to be curious to the knowledge of the other? Because I'm an expert, I have certitude, I know what I'm talking about, I have technical strengths, and you said I need to be curious. So I feel that I'm curious on my technology, but in fact you are suggesting to turn off this knowledge and listen to other skills or other expertise.
Exactly right. That is what I'm suggesting. And you know, when the great inventors take, you know, the famous story of Thomas Edison inventing the light bulb, and hundreds of combinations of filaments and gases and electricities, finally, in the hundreds and hundreds of experiments, came to one that worked. And what fueled that drive to try the next one? It was curiosity. And even with deep technical knowledge, it doesn't mean that you don't have to be curious. And actually, to your point, I'm not suggesting that we put our knowledge to the side. I'm suggesting that we use it with some humility to ask new questions, to use what we know, but apply it to being curious about things that we don't know. And, you know, the most boring person in the world, we've all met them, is the person that thinks that they know everything, and they tell you how wrong you are about all the questions you have or the things you're talking about. That's because they've stopped being curious. They've closed off the world and live in their little expert box. Those are people that are going to, all they're doing is holding on, hopefully long enough that they can, I guess, get enough money until their death comes to them. But they're not interesting. And, you know, we talk a lot about bias, and you know, how are we able to see with that level of clarity? And Matthew, you made a comment the other day as we were talking about things that I wanted to come back to, since we've let this question out of the bottle, and that is, how do we avoid bias in our work, and how do you play with that idea of bias and judgment?
Absolutely. And just before answering that question, I love the example of Thomas Edison. And one thing I usually say about it is that before Edison, if you want to do light, you have to burn something. And where Edison changed everything is to say, but to do light, we won't burn. We would go to a certain level without burning. And I think that's where you really, you know, change the entire paradigm about light. And that's where he not only, you know, reject his expertise, or at least turn it off, but he didn't just turn it off. He actually said, what if I would go against this you know, common sense and common knowledge of humanity for many years, that you have to burn something to get light. I think he was probably a design thinker before he was even named that way. But coming back to your question about, you know, bias, I think that's something important, is that, and it's also reflecting on something that Bertrand said about, you know, you have to step in the room knowing that you're going to be biased, and that all the experience you have, your perspective, going to change literally everything you're going to see. And I think, you know, as long as you're trying to observe your you know, you're using your different senses, your you know, your eyes, your ears and stuff, and there is no way to, you know, make it objective. It has to be biased at some point. So I think avoiding bias is probably a lose struggle, a lose battle. Aim is more to use it, to you know, acknowledge the bias you have, and also accept that what you're going to come up is going to be biased. And I think what's fantastic with design thinking and what make it actually very hard for very rational scientific person to accept design thinking is that it's not it's not a science in like math. Like what I'm saying usually is that if you're taking the same equation, it can be solved in different ways using design thinking, whereas if you're doing math, then there is just one way to solve it. And I think you have to accept from the very beginning that once you start a project, there's going to be an output for sure. And that if you're starting the exact same project later on or with different people, you would have another output. And that's okay. There is more than one answer. And it's fine to think that the moment you start a project, there is actually an unlimited number of possible options, and that you'll have to pick just one of it. You'll have to explore till the end only one of it, which I think is a very hard part in design thinking. But also, I think it's what makes it so fantastic is that there is room for innovation all the time, because at the moment you say any equation can have a new answer, then that means that you can keep on innovating all the time, and even some stuff that hasn't been evolving for the past years or decades or centuries can still be challenged. And that's what happened again with Thomas Edison in the light, is that he was biased at some point. He accepted that creating light could have different. You can have different ways of solving the equation of creating light, and I think that's where bias should be not avoided, but really should be acknowledged and should be triggered to make something even more creative. And yeah, coming back to that, maybe a question for you, Bertrand, to go deeper on that thought. What do you think of all the design thinking skills? Which one do you think is the most useful for a company?
I will make a French answer. It means something a little bit poetic. In fact, we are fan of what we call hybrid thinking. Mm-hmm. And hybrid thinking is the beginning of the answer of your question. The skills need to be the ability of hybridation, if it's English, how to hybrid the skills of the others. And in many companies for which I'm working for, in many companies we are facing the silo culture. Mm-hmm. It means R&D. Who owns the project? Is it R&D? Is it marketing? Is it sales? Is it finance? And the one who owns the project has the power. So the first, I must say that I'm a former basketball player. I was in a French national team decades ago, and I still play the game. Sorry?
No, sorry, I just interrupt you because that's a very funny thing. Is if you type Clark Kelogg on Google, you would figure out that Kelogg is also an impressive basketball player.
No, really incredible. We need to set up another discussion.
Well, the punchline to that joke, however, is that the Clark Kelogg you get when you Google the name is much more famous than me, and he is a former NBA 6'6" African-American professional basketball player. So I disappoint people all over the world when I go to airline counters.
Coming back to the basketball, I was the smallest in my team, and my goal was to play with the best player, use the highest one, play with the speediest one, and try to give the ball at the right moment to the right guy. And this is design thinking too. And this is the most important skill in design thinking practices, is to be able to give the ball to the right guy at the right moment. In Zebra, we say that we are not project manager. The boss is the project. And we introduced several years ago a kind of a running possession, turning possession of the project. I am against project manager, and I know that I can be provocative. That as we were talking about bias, if the project manager has a technical mindset, he will have bias. If he is marketing, from marketing, he will have another bias, etc., etc. At Zebra, we try to make teams, and the teams is the project manager, and the owner is really turning according to the sequence of the project. And I try to don't trust engineer for the engineering, don't trust marketer for the marketing, but I try always to put a owner which is not the specialist. And then he plays with the other. This is like me when I was guard in basketball. And I play the same game. I don't know about you, Clark, but what is your experience on this? Who should own the design thinking process?
I agree totally, Bertrand. The work, the project, the need owns it, and to translate that into the functional parts of the design thinking process, it's, we focus on the user's needs, but where we really focus on is when we are able to using listening and distilling and synthesizing and finding the why behind the what, we resolve the gap between what people say and do, and we arrive at an insight, at a new realization about the problem we're solving. That realization becomes the owner, if you will, of the project. It is, how can we make that new idea come to life? How can we solve that need? And everything is judged against that idea. Does it take us further toward that insight, that unmet need? And that's what drives it. And to your point about, I love the analogy of the basketball team and the passing to the right player at the right time, because I do believe completely with you. I agree with you that it's the art of the team in that case to know, and the teams do know, if they're deeply engaged by the insight or the need of the problem, they know when to switch gears. They know what to do. They know exactly when things need to change phases or bring in new thoughts, new technologies, new expertise. And it's such a beautiful thing to see a highly skilled team work that way. It's a joy. And I've been at this a long time, as you all know. I've probably been on 100 project teams or more, and about 5 of them have been these magical dream teams where we just know this because why do we know it? High levels of communication, high levels of trust, and a focus on the outcomes we're interested in, which is solving the needs that we've discovered in doing the work. And just to a point that Mathieu mentioned earlier of Henry Ford's story of asking a customer what they wanted, and they would say a faster horse. That's exactly, I love that story because we're not looking to create faster horses. We're often looking to create things that people haven't thought about. But here's something that I get such joy out of. Once a solution is achieved, people will look at it and say, oh, well, that's so obvious. Why didn't I think of that? And that means we've done a good job if it seems so obvious. And we have a saying for it, which is the path to simplicity travels through complexity. And simply means it gets kind of messy, but you know it when you found a good answer because it seems so simple and obvious. And it's it almost is comical at that point.
It's funny what you said. It's funny because I'm used to say that the 20th century has been the century of engineering, and I think the 21st century will be the century of design thinking, just because we know a lot about engineering, we know a lot about technology, and we just discovered this 1 century ago, but now The goal is to play with these technologies, not to invent so much new big technology. But it's funny to say that we are living a fantastic period where we need to break the rules and break the common sense. For instance, I'm taking an aviation industry. Mm-hmm. We were blind. We were obsessed by technology and this fantastic ability of human to create bigger and bigger plane able to fly. So we were fascinated by achieving to take off the biggest plane, which is called A380, A380. So able to carry so many people. And at the moment, precisely now, Air France, the French company, decided to stop the use of this plane. Too big, too difficult to fulfill. And in fact, it's 20 or 30 years of thinking down, completely down, because now the new goal is not the quantity, so it's not the ability of being able to take off with tons and tons. No, perhaps it's agility, small plane, light, and perhaps drone is the next normal. So aviation industry is perhaps turning to a 4-place plane. I'm joking, of course. It's a real breakthrough, and design thinking is able to manage that kind of breakthrough. Mathieu, if you see the I would say the future of design thinking, do you think that we have more future in existing business or in defining new businesses?
Yeah, I can't agree more on what you said, and usually the way I relate to it, saying that at first, when a company wants to be successful, they would use engineers to manufacture product faster and cheaper. Then what happened probably 50 or 70 years ago was marketing was started and say, I can manufacture the same product, but the way I'm going to sell it, it's going to be much more successful. So we start, using marketing as a key differentiator for a company to step up to the, compared to the competitors. And I think for the past years, the more of the experience that you're providing to your user has become the new key differentiator. And this experience that you can bring to a user is essentially possible thanks to design thinking, for instance, which I think is the most effective way to do it. So I believe we are definitely in this shift where we're moving from engineer to marketing to probably experience, and how you're not selling product anymore, how you're not selling services anymore, you're selling experience. And one example that I find pretty interesting is far away from us is actually something that we're witnessing today in China. China had this single kid politics for a very long time, where family could have only one kid. And what happened is that the kids and family were kind of feeling alone because they had no siblings, the brothers and sisters to play with. So they had to create other relationship with other elements of their lives. And now what we're seeing taking off in China is the brands that are actually acting as siblings for young Chinese, and they're creating a very, very deep connection with the users, and it's totally disrupting the retail industry in the sense that it's not about just being a brand. It's about really creating a deep relationship with your customers and your users, because there is an intense need for that, especially in China, that we're witnessing today, and I'm sure it's going to expand to the rest of the world probably tomorrow. And I think that point of moving from a product to service to now experience is really key. And I can't think about any other way to do it better than design thinking in terms of creating the experience and engaging customers with what you're trying to offer them.
Yeah, it's funny because you talk about brand, and frankly speaking, for me, this is the bigger lack in design thinking process, branding. If I want to be provocative, this is the only mistake. I don't know if it's mistake or a problem with design thinking. That for me there is a lack of branding. perspective. I mean, if three companies are starting a design thinking process at the same time, for me, the risk is that they arrive to the same solution because they empathize, they define the problem, they do creativity. And by the way, design thinking in France is too much confusing with creativity, which is only one part of the process. But after the empathize phase, we define the problem, creativity, we prototype, etc., etc. The danger is that brand can change everything. If you do the same process and you are Colgate-Palmolive, or you are Signal in toothbrushes, or you are a medical brand, it's a big factor to influence the process and the solution. And it doesn't appear in design thinking process. What do you think, Clark, on this massive attack from the French?
Well, as you were talking, Bertrand, I was thinking, I'm agreeing with you that that brand is not included. We sometimes talk about the North Star of a project, the big idea, but brand isn't usually part of that equation. And I think it's because the big brands that we all know very well, you mentioned Colgate, Signal, they're so large as organizations that to get the influence of design thinking to affect the brand is requires that the CEO is a design thinker.
Yeah.
And so there are some companies like Nike that have that relationship of brand and to design. And but there's not a whole lot of them. Some of the newer digital companies are started by designers or design thinkers, and they have that. But I think it's a historic problem that designers generally are not the directors of companies. They're not. We have chief innovation officers and things like that now, but I think that's more just pandering to trend. So the companies in which design thinking can be influential enough can have brand as a design factor in creating products, services, policies, culture, etc. I just think that we haven't been influential enough. Years ago, in the 90s, I was working in a large financial services company, and I was brought in to introduce innovation and communication brand stuff. And I sat on the board of the company, and that was the first time a designer had been in a Fortune 500 company in any function. And, and actually after 4 years, they fired me. So even at that level, design and design thinking was not seen as influential enough. I do think, to your point, that it will grow as Mathieu was talking about the world we're going to live in. We won't be able to proceed with our vibrant economies being responsive to people's needs and the Earth's needs if we don't bring imagination to a new level of influence in companies. And I don't know if the avant-garde composer John Cage is known very well. He's not actually known very well anywhere, but he's an American. But he said this piece that I think frames in for me the value of design thinking, and it's kind of a funny thing. He said, "I don't know why people are afraid of new ideas. It's the old ideas that scare me."
Excellent.
And I kind of find that as a way to I think frame in a question, Mathieu, to throw over to you, which is how do you see design thinking growing in influence in the 21st century, as Bertrand said, the century of design? How do you see that taking place?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very honored because I guess that's our last question because we're kind of out of time. So I'll have the final word, and before that, just thank you so much for this brilliant discussion, the two of you. I would just kind of quote myself, I can say, while I'm speaking with the students of my class at UC Berkeley, at the end of the course, I always tell them, you are responsible. And you're responsible in two ways, in a way that you're accountable for what you're going to do and the way you're going to shape the world of tomorrow, the way you're going to have an influence in your company. And also you are responsible in the sense that you want to do responsible things and you want to act in an ethical way. And I guess that's also how I would love to see design thinking used in the future, is by, these 3P bottom line that you maybe heard about, which is the people, the profit, and the planet. And I think that the 21st century would probably be the century of design, but also of a meaningful and of a responsible design. And that's the biggest hope I'm nurturing right now for the next generation. And I know it's a big concern for them, and I know it's a big concern for you guys who are listening to us. Let's be responsible for the future of our industry and the future of our world. Thank you so much, Clark from California and Bertrand from Grenoble, I guess, for being with us today. It was really a great pleasure for me to be part of that, and I hope the audience will enjoy as much as we did this exercise.
Thank you. This has been so much fun, and I appreciate your invitation.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm happy, and I'm happy to discuss with you guys. We need to do it again.
Yes, wonderful.
And thank you, Mineralogic, of course, for putting this together, and yeah, hope you guys will enjoy it. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So yes, design thinking is the next normal. Yes. Thank you, guys.